Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, sometimes it waits behind a door that refuses to be opened. The dream came back in fragments, like cold breath against glass, a dim room with no windows, a steady knocking that echoed every few seconds, slow and patient, as if whatever made that sound had long ago stopped expecting to be heard. And Daniel Reeves woke before the final knock, his chest tight, the taste of something metallic lingering at the back of his throat, the kind of feeling that didn't belong to memory alone, the kind that followed him out of sleep and into the quiet gray of early morning, where the world outside his truck sat still beneath a thin layer of frost, pine trees standing tall and silent along the narrow gravel road, and beside him, Rex was already awake, not pacing, not restless, just sitting upright in the passenger seat with his ears locked forward and his eyes fixed on something Daniel couldn't yet see, something ahead, something waiting. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, the rough scrape of stubble grounding him in the present, then glanced at the dashboard clock, 6:17 a.m., the digits glowing faint against the dim cabin light. And for a moment he just listened, the way he used to in places where silence meant more than peace, where it carried weight, intention, warning. But out here there was only the wind brushing softly through the trees and the low hum of the engine cooling beneath the hood. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained the way Rex refused to relax, the way his body held tension like a coiled spring. And when Daniel opened the truck door and stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching lightly over frozen gravel, Rex didn't follow right away, which in itself was enough to make him pause. Because in 6 years the dog had never hesitated, not once, not through storms or noise or long empty miles. But now he lingered, watching the narrow path that led through the trees toward the old house Daniel had been asked to check on, a place that barely showed on maps, tucked deep into a stretch of land most people had forgotten. And when Rex finally jumped down, it wasn't with his usual ease, it was slower, deliberate, his nose lifting into the air as if catching a scent too faint for human senses. And together they walked, boots and paws leaving soft impressions in the frost, the trees closing in around them as the path narrowed, until the house revealed itself between the trunks, a structure of weathered wood and stone, its windows dark, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of time. And something about it felt still, not abandoned exactly, but waiting, the way a room waits when someone has just stepped out and might return at any moment. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the air, then moved toward the front steps, each one creaking faintly beneath his weight. And Rex stayed close, closer than usual, his shoulder brushing Daniel's leg as if anchoring himself to something solid, something known, until they reached the front door, slightly ajar, the wood worn smooth where countless hands had once pushed it open, and Daniel rested his palm against it, feeling the cold seep through his glove before nudging it wider, the hinges letting out a low, tired groan that echoed into the dim hallway beyond, where dust hung in the air like suspended memory and the faint scent of old wood, and something deeper, something harder to place, lingered just beneath it. And Rex stepped forward, just one pace, then stopped. His ears rose sharply, his body stiffened, and a low sound rumbled in his chest. Not a bark, not fear, something older, instinctive, and Daniel felt it immediately, that subtle shift in the air, the kind that didn't belong to sight or sound but pressed against the skin all the same. And he followed the dog's gaze down the narrow hallway, where a single door at the far end stood slightly open. Darkness pooled inside like a shadow that refused to move, and for a long second neither of them moved, the world holding its breath around them, until Daniel took one step forward and Rex didn't follow. Daniel paused just inside the doorway, his hand still resting lightly against the wood as if the house itself might shift beneath his touch, and behind him Rex let out a quiet, restrained whine, the kind he used only when something felt deeply wrong, not immediate danger, but something that should not be ignored. And Daniel glanced back over his shoulder, meeting the dog's eyes, amber and steady yet filled with a hesitation he had never seen before. And for a brief second the memory surfaced again, a distant night under foreign skies when silence had stretched just like this, when a signal had been dismissed as nothing more than interference, and the cost of that decision had followed him ever since. But here, now, standing in a narrow hallway of an empty house in The middle of nowhere. He told himself it was different, that this was just an old structure settling into itself, with shrinking in the cold, pipes long dry, nothing more than time pressing against forgotten walls. And he turned forward again, drawing in a slow breath before stepping deeper inside. Each footstep careful, measured, the floorboards responding with soft creaks that echoed farther than they should have, as if the space around him was larger than the house itself, stretching in ways his eyes could not quite confirm, and the air felt colder the farther he moved. Not the natural chill of a building left unheated, but something sharper, more focused, like stepping into a place where warmth had been deliberately taken away. The hallway narrowed as he approached the final door, the one Rex refused to cross, and Daniel noticed how the light shifted along the walls, faint gray from the morning outside, bending strangely as it reached the threshold, dimming in a way that made the doorway seem deeper than it was, and he slowed, his instincts stirring despite himself, years of training rising quietly beneath the surface, reminding him to observe, to listen, to trust patterns over assumptions. And that was when he heard it, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the natural settling of the house, a soft, rhythmic sound that came and went with precise timing, a low knock or pulse that repeated with unsettling consistency. And Daniel stopped completely, his head tilting slightly as he counted without meaning to, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 27 before it came again, steady, unchanged, not random, not accidental. And something about that exact interval tightened his chest, because he knew that rhythm, not from this place, but from somewhere else, somewhere he had tried not to revisit, where measured vibrations meant something hidden beneath the surface, something waiting to be uncovered. And he stepped closer to the door, his gloved hand lifting slowly, as if approaching something alive. The faint sound continuing on the other side, patient, deliberate, and behind him Rex shifted his weight, claws clicking once against the floor before he retreated a step, refusing still, not out of fear but out of certainty, as if the line between where he stood and where Daniel was about to go mattered more than anything else. And Daniel exhaled, steadying himself, before pushing the door open just a few inches more, enough to let the dim light slip inside and reveal the outline of the room beyond, a small space with bare walls and a single window covered in dust, the floor uneven in places where boards had been replaced at some point long ago. And the sound grew clearer now, not louder, just more defined, a gentle knock beneath the surface, as if something within the house itself was remembering how to be heard. And Daniel stepped across the threshold alone, the air shifting instantly around him, colder, heavier, and the moment his foot touched the floor inside, the sound stopped. Daniel did not move at first, his boot resting fully on the floor inside the room, his breath slow and controlled, but his senses sharpened in a way that felt older than thought, because the silence that followed was not empty, it was deliberate, like something had noticed him in return, and he stood there listening for the rhythm to return, counting without realizing it again, 1, 2, 3, all the way through 27. But nothing came, no knock, no vibration, only the faint whisper of cold air brushing against the back of his neck, and behind him, just beyond the doorway, Rex let out a low, uneasy exhale, not loud, not panicked, but steady, as if reminding Daniel that the boundary he had crossed still mattered. And Daniel slowly turned his head, scanning the room in full for the first time, taking in every detail the way he had been trained to do. The dimensions small, no more than 10 by 12 feet, the ceiling low with a slight sag toward the center, the single window clouded over with years of dust and neglect, allowing only a thin gray light to filter through, just enough to outline shapes, but not enough to bring warmth. And the walls were bare except for faint marks where something had once been mounted and removed, leaving behind ghost-like impressions that did not quite match the surrounding wood. And his gaze dropped to the floor, where the uneven boards caught his attention again, one section slightly darker than the rest, not from rot, but from difference, newer wood placed among older planks. And he stepped closer, kneeling slowly, his glove brushing across the surface as he tested the grain, the temperature, the subtle give beneath pressure, and there it was, almost imperceptible, a faint shift under his weight, not enough to be unsafe, but enough to confirm that something beneath this section was not solid ground. And as his hand rested there, The sound returned, not through the air this time, but through contact, a soft pulse rising directly into his palm, steady, measured, unmistakable, and Daniel froze, his fingers pressing slightly harder as if to confirm it. And again it came, a low, rhythmic thump beneath the wood, every 27 seconds, consistent as a heartbeat. And this time there was no mistaking it, no explaining it away as settling timber or distant movement. Because the timing was too precise, too controlled, and something about it felt intentional, like a signal repeating itself over and over, waiting for someone to notice. And Daniel swallowed slowly, his throat tightening as memory aligned with present sensation. That same interval, that same unnatural regularity, and he shifted his weight back slightly, scanning the edges of the altered boards, looking for seams, for hinges, for any sign that the surface had been designed to open. And as his eyes adjusted further to the dim light, he noticed it, a narrow line running along one edge where dust had not settled evenly, a subtle indication of movement over time, and he reached toward it carefully, his fingers tracing the line until they found a small indentation barely large enough for a fingertip, hidden where the grain of the wood broke naturally. And he hesitated there, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because whatever lay beneath this floor was not accidental. It had been placed here, sealed, forgotten, or hidden, and Rex shifted again at the doorway, his body now angled away from the room, as if he could not bring himself to look inside any longer, and Daniel drew in a quiet breath. Before pressing his fingers into the indentation, applying steady pressure, and for a moment nothing happened, the room holding its silence like a held breath, until a soft mechanical click echoed faintly beneath the floor, subtle but undeniable, and the wood beneath his hand gave just slightly, enough to confirm that something below had just begun to respond. The shift beneath his hand was subtle at first, just enough to confirm that the surface was no longer fixed, and Daniel kept his fingers pressed into the indentation, applying steady pressure as the mechanism beneath responded with a quiet series of internal movements, soft clicks traveling through the wood like distant echoes of something waking up after a long time. And then, almost reluctantly, the section of floor in front of him lowered by less than an inch, creating a thin seam that released a breath of colder air from below, air that did not feel stale or trapped, but strangely preserved, as if it had been waiting undisturbed for years. And Daniel withdrew his hand slowly, his eyes fixed on the shifting panel as he adjusted his stance, placing one knee carefully beside it, and gripping the edge where the boards had separated, testing the weight, the resistance, the intention behind its design. And it moved with surprising ease, lifting just enough to reveal darkness beneath, not the kind of darkness created by absence of light, but the kind that seemed to hold depth, as if it extended farther than the structure above should allow. Behind him, Rex stepped back another pace, his nails scraping softly against the hallway floor, his body now angled almost fully away, yet his head remained turned toward Daniel, ears pulled slightly back, his posture firm with a quiet insistence that did not need sound to be understood. And Daniel felt it, that pull, that instinct urging him to stop, to step back, to close the panel, and leave whatever lay beneath untouched. But the steady rhythm returned beneath the opening, faint but present again, pulsing through the edges of the exposed space every 27 seconds. And it was no longer something he could ignore, not after recognizing its pattern, not after feeling it directly through his own hand. And so he leaned forward, bracing one hand against the floor as he lifted the panel further, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to pass through. And beneath it a set of steps emerged, descending into shadow, wooden at first, but quickly disappearing into darkness beyond what the dim light from above could reach. Daniel reached to his side and unhooked the small flashlight clipped to his belt, the metal cool against his glove as he turned it on, a narrow beam cutting cleanly into the space below, illuminating the first few steps, worn but intact, the edges slightly rounded as if they had once been used regularly, though not recently. And the light revealed more than just structure, it revealed intention, the steps built carefully, not improvised, leading somewhere specific, somewhere hidden with purpose. And the walls that framed them were not raw earth, but reinforced with old timber, aged but sturdy, suggesting that whatever lay beneath had been meant to last, to remain sealed until the right moment or the right person found it. The beam of light reached farther as he leaned closer, tracing the descent until it met a flat surface below, a floor perhaps 10 feet down, and for a brief moment he caught the outline of something there, indistinct shapes that hinted at objects rather than emptiness. But the light flickered slightly as the cold air moved against it, and the image shifted just enough to remain uncertain, and Daniel steadied his grip, drawing a slow breath as he considered the distance, the structure, the quiet persistence of the rhythm that continued below, still measured, still patient, and behind him Rex let out a single, low sound, not loud enough to echo, but deep enough to carry meaning, and Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, acknowledging it without turning back, before opening them again and placing his boot carefully onto the first step, testing it with his weight, the wood holding firm, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment to be used again. The wood beneath his boot held steady as Daniel shifted his weight onto the first step, the faint creak it released sounding less like strain and more like acknowledgement, as if the structure recognized his presence and accepted it without resistance. And he paused there for a moment, his body angled slightly upward toward the open room behind him, where the gray light still spilled faintly across the floor, and beyond that, Rex remained just outside the doorway, unmoving now, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway, watching with a stillness that carried more weight than any command, and Daniel met his gaze one last time before turning away, lowering himself slowly onto the second step, then the third, each movement deliberate, controlled, his hand sliding along the rough timber of the wall for balance as the air grew colder with every inch he descended. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness in a narrow path, revealing the worn texture of the steps, the faint dust undisturbed by recent movement, and the reinforced walls that surrounded him, their surfaces marked by age but not decay, as if whatever had been built here had been meant to endure not just time, but absence. And the deeper he moved, the more the world above seemed to fade, the soft ambient sounds of the forest disappearing until there was only the quiet rhythm below, returning now with greater clarity, a measured pulse that echoed through the confined space every 27 seconds, consistent, unwavering, and as Daniel counted again, the pattern aligned perfectly with the memory he had tried to keep distant, a night of waiting, of listening, of trusting a signal that had come too late, and he exhaled slowly, forcing his focus back to the present as his boots reached the final step and met solid ground. The floor beneath was different here. Not wood but packed earth reinforced with flat stone, cool and firm beneath his weight, and the space around him opened slightly, just enough to allow him to stand upright without bending, though the ceiling remained low, supported by thick wooden beams that stretched across the width of the chamber, and the air carried a faint scent, not unpleasant, but old, like paper that had been sealed away from light. And as Daniel raised the flashlight higher, the beam revealed shapes emerging from the darkness, objects arranged with quiet intention rather than abandonment, a narrow table against one wall, its surface lined with items that caught the light in muted reflections, a metal container, a glass jar, and something that looked like a small mechanical device, its surface still intact despite the years, and on the far side of the room, a single chair sat facing the wall, positioned as if someone had once occupied it for long periods of time, watching or waiting for something unseen. Daniel stepped forward slowly, his movements careful not to disturb the fragile stillness of the space, and as he passed the table, the beam of his light shifted across its surface, catching the edges of papers stacked neatly beside the objects, their corners slightly curled but preserved, and something about their arrangement felt deliberate, not forgotten, not discarded, but left behind with purpose, and he reached out instinctively, his gloved hand hovering just above them before he stopped. Himself, his attention pulled instead toward the far wall where the sound seemed strongest, where the rhythm echoed more clearly, rising from a specific point just above the ground. And he moved toward it, each step measured, until he stood within arm's reach of the source, the beam of light steady against the surface, revealing a section of the wall where the wood had been replaced with a different material, smoother, darker, almost metallic beneath the thin layer of dust. And as the next pulse came, he saw it, not heard it, but saw it, a faint vibration traveling across that surface, subtle but undeniable, as if something behind it was still active, still present, still reaching outward with that same steady interval. And Daniel felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition, because whatever this was, it was not random, it was not natural, it was something that had been built, designed, and left here for a reason that had not yet finished unfolding. Daniel did not reach for the surface right away, even though the impulse to act pressed quietly at the edges of his mind, because something about the rhythm, the precision of it, demanded more than reaction. It demanded understanding, and he stood there in the dim, enclosed space, the narrow beam of his flashlight steady against the dark panel, watching as the faint vibration passed through it again, subtle but exact, like a signal repeating itself with patience rather than urgency. And he found himself counting without thinking, his breath sinking unconsciously with the interval, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 27. And when it came again, he noticed something he had missed before, not just the movement of the surface, but a slight change in the tone of the sound beneath it, as if there were layers to it, a deeper resonance followed by a lighter echo, like something striking and then something responding. And that realization shifted his focus, because it meant this was not just a mechanical repetition, it was an interaction, something initiating and something answering. And Daniel stepped closer, lowering himself slightly, so that his ear aligned more directly with the panel, his gloved hand hovering just inches away as he listened, truly listened, the way he had been trained to in moments where the smallest detail could mean everything. Behind him, far above, there was a faint sound that filtered down through the narrow opening, a single movement from Rex, a repositioning that carried through the structure like a distant reminder, and Daniel closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself in that presence before returning his attention to the task in front of him. And this time, when the next interval came, he felt it as much as he heard it, a soft pulse that traveled through the air and into his body, subtle but undeniable, and beneath it, just for a fraction of a second, there was something else, a second vibration that did not follow the same timing, something irregular, something almost like a hesitation, and Daniel's eyes opened slowly, his focus sharpening as he processed the difference, because that second signal did not belong to the pattern. It broke it, interrupted it in a way that felt less like design and more like resistance. And that was when the thought settled into place, quiet but certain, that whatever lay behind this surface was not simply operating. It was trying to communicate, and not in a language of words, but in timing, in rhythm, in repetition and deviation. He shifted his stance slightly, adjusting the angle of the flashlight so the beam traced along the edges of the panel, revealing faint markings that had gone unnoticed before, not scratches, not damage, but intentional etchings, shallow lines carved into the material in a pattern that mirrored the timing he had been counting, small groupings spaced at intervals that matched the pulses, and Daniel reached out carefully this time, placing his hand flat against the surface just as the next signal came, and he held it there, steady, waiting, and when the pulse passed through, he did not pull away, he kept his hand in place, and after a brief pause, the second, irregular vibration returned, softer, weaker, but unmistakably present, and something inside him shifted then, not fear, not urgency, but recognition, because he had felt this before, not in a place, but in a moment, when something buried had tried to reach out, not with force, but with persistence, waiting for someone to notice. The difference between noise and meaning, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady as he spoke into the quiet space, not expecting an answer, but offering acknowledgement. I hear you. And the room, for just a moment, seemed to hold that statement like a fragile truth suspended in the air, before the next pulse came, steady as ever, but now, undeniably, something within it had changed. Daniel kept his hand against the surface, steady and grounded, feeling the subtle life within the material, as if it were something more than constructed, something that carried intention rather than function. And when the next pulse came, he did not just count it, he listened for the space between, for the silence that followed, and there it was again, that faint secondary tremor, weaker, irregular, but persistent, like something trying to push through a barrier it could not fully break, and his mind began to align the patterns, the intervals, the etched markings along the panel. and the memory that had followed him into this place, the dream of a room where something had been knocking, not in panic, not in chaos, but in patience, waiting to be recognized. And he slowly drew his hand back, shifting the flashlight to illuminate the entire panel more clearly, tracing the shallow lines carved into it, small groupings that repeated in uneven clusters, and he realized they were not random. They were counting something or marking something, a sequence broken into sections, and he stepped back just enough to take it all in, his eyes narrowing slightly as he followed the pattern from left to right, each grouping separated by just enough space to suggest meaning. And then he heard it again, not just the pulse, but something beneath it, a faint, almost hollow resonance that carried a different tone, like sound passing through a contained space rather than solid ground. And that was when the realization settled deeper, that this was not just a signal embedded in structure. It was a signal coming from behind it, from a space that had been sealed but not silenced. Above him, the faint outline of the opening to the house remained visible, a distant rectangle of gray light, and from that direction came a soft, restrained sound from Rex, not a bark, not a warning, but something quieter, almost like a breath held too long, and Daniel felt it reach him even down here, that silent insistence, not telling him to leave, but reminding him that what he was doing mattered, that this was a point of choice. And he turned back to the panel, his focus narrowing again. And this time he did something different. Instead of waiting for the rhythm, he spoke between it, his voice low and even. If you are there, do it again. And he held his breath without meaning to, his body still, his senses tuned to the smallest change. And for a moment, nothing happened. The room settling into its quiet stillness, the beam of the flashlight steady against the dark surface. And then, before the expected interval, before the count could reach even 10, the faint, irregular vibration returned, not aligned with the pattern, not bound by the 27 seconds, but separate, intentional, and Daniel felt his chest tighten as the confirmation settled in, undeniable now, that something behind that barrier was aware, responsive, and reaching back. He stepped closer again, this time placing both hands against the panel, his palms flat, grounding himself in the contact, and he spoke again, quieter, more certain. I know you are there. And the response came, not immediately, but sooner than the steady pulse, a faint tremor that carried through the material into his hands, weaker than before, but present, unmistakably present, and Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, not out of fear, but out of respect for the moment, because whatever this was, it had endured time, silence, and separation, and it had not stopped trying to be heard. And when he opened his eyes again, his expression had changed, not hardened, not alarmed, but focused with a quiet resolve, because this was no longer about curiosity or mystery. It was about connection, about understanding something that had been waiting far too long. And somewhere above, Rex shifted once more, his presence steady, grounding, as if he had known all along that this was never just about a room, but about what remained hidden behind it, waiting for someone who would finally listen. Daniel did not step back this time. Even though every instinct shaped by years of survival told him that unknown spaces demanded caution, because this was no longer unknown in the way danger usually was. It had revealed a pattern, a response, something deliberate that existed beyond randomness, and he shifted his stance slightly, lowering his flashlight to the base of the panel where the faint seam between materials became more visible, tracing it slowly with his eyes as he followed the edges, searching not just for an opening, but for intention, for the way it had been designed to be accessed. And the steady pulse returned again, precise, predictable, while the irregular response came just after, softer but present, like a second voice trying to speak through the first. And Daniel exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the rhythm, letting it guide his focus rather than distract it. His hand moved along the surface again, this time not pressing, but feeling, reading the subtle differences in texture, the slight variations in temperature, until his fingers paused over a section where the material felt smoother, less worn, as if it had been touched more often than the rest, and he leaned closer, adjusting the beam of light until it revealed a small recessed area, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and within it, a narrow groove shaped just enough to suggest a mechanism, something that required more than pressure, something that required alignment. Behind him, the faint outline of the opening above remained unchanged, but the presence of Rex felt stronger now, not physically closer, but more present in Daniel's awareness, as if the dog's stillness carried its own form of communication, a quiet understanding that whatever happened next would matter beyond this moment. And Daniel nodded once, not turning, acknowledging that silent connection before focusing again on the panel. He placed his fingers carefully into the groove, testing its depth, its resistance, and then he paused, waiting for the next pulse, timing his movement with the rhythm as it approached, and when it came, he applied gentle pressure, not forcing, but following, and the response was immediate, a deeper mechanical shift from within the structure, a series of internal movements that felt heavier, older, as if something long sealed had begun to unlock in stages, and the panel responded by loosening. Slightly, the seam widening just enough to reveal a faint line of darkness beyond, deeper than before, and the irregular vibration came again, stronger this time, more pronounced, no longer just a whisper beneath the pattern, but a clear interruption, a presence pushing back against the barrier. Daniel held his position, steady, allowing the mechanism to complete its movement, and the panel shifted outward just a fraction of an inch, enough for the cold air from within to escape more freely, carrying with it a different scent now, something not just old, but preserved, like a space untouched by time, and he slowly pulled the panel toward him, the weight of it greater than expected, but manageable, revealing a second layer behind it, not a wall, but a narrow chamber, enclosed and dim. Its interior revealed gradually as the light entered, and what he saw there was not emptiness, not machinery alone, but something placed with purpose, something that had been left behind, waiting to be found. The rhythm stopped completely now, not fading, not slowing, but ending, as if the act of opening had fulfilled its purpose, and in that silence, Daniel stepped forward, lowering the light into the newly revealed space, his breath steady, his focus clear, knowing that whatever he was about to see next would not just explain the signal, it would change the meaning of everything that had led him here. Daniel lowered the beam of his flashlight into the narrow chamber, his hand steady though his breath slowed to a near stillness, and what the light revealed was not what he had expected, not machinery, not empty space, but a carefully preserved interior that felt less like a hidden compartment and more like a place someone had intended to be found, a small enclosure lined with reinforced panels, its surfaces clean in a way that defied the years above it, and at the center, resting on a low platform, was a sealed metal case, its edges worn but intact, its surface marked with faint lettering that had dulled with time, yet remained readable under the narrow beam, and Daniel stepped closer, his boots making almost no sound against the stone as he approached it, the silence around him now complete, the rhythmic pulse gone entirely, as if its purpose had ended the moment the barrier opened. He knelt slowly, bringing the light closer to the case, and his eyes traced the markings, recognizing the format, the structure, the kind of labeling used in operations that were never meant to be public, and something deep in his chest shifted as the realization formed, not sudden, but gradual, like a memory aligning with the present, and he reached out, brushing his glove lightly across the surface, clearing a thin layer of dust to reveal the name etched into the metal, not his own, but one he had not heard spoken aloud in years, a name tied to a moment he had carried quietly, a moment where a signal had been misread, where a decision had been made too late, and the weight of that memory settled into him now, not as regret, but as understanding. The case was secured with a simple latch, no longer locked, as if time itself had released it, and Daniel hesitated only briefly before lifting it open, the hinges moving without resistance, revealing its contents in the steady beam of light, documents preserved in protective sleeves, a small device with a worn interface, and beneath them, a folded letter, its edges yellowed but intact, placed deliberately at the top as if meant to be the first thing seen, and Daniel reached for it carefully, unfolding it with a measured touch, his eyes scanning the words slowly, taking them in not just as information, but as something meant specifically for whoever would stand where he now stood. The message was simple, written with clarity and purpose, describing a system designed to continue signaling even when all other means had failed, a fallback that relied not on technology alone, but on time, patience, and the hope that someone, someday, would listen closely enough to understand the difference between repetition and response. And as Daniel read, the pieces aligned fully, the dream, the rhythm, the deviation, all of it forming a single thread that had led him here, not by accident, but by something quieter, something that did not force, but waited. He lowered the letter slowly, his gaze lingering on the words before placing it back exactly as he had found it. And for a moment he remained there, still, the weight of the discovery settling into something calmer, something resolved. And then he rose, turning toward the steps above, the faint gray light from the house waiting where he had left it. Unchanged, steady, and when he reached the top and stepped back into the room, Rex was there immediately, closing the distance without hesitation this time, pressing lightly against Daniel's side, as if confirming what had shifted, and Daniel rested his hand on the dog's head, his fingers moving slowly through the familiar texture of fur, grounding himself in the present moment. He glanced once more at the open panel, the hidden space now revealed, no longer silent, no longer waiting, and then he gently lowered it back into place, not to hide it again, but to complete what had begun long before he arrived. And as he stepped out of the room, the house felt different, not lighter, not heavier, but settled, as if something unfinished had finally been acknowledged. And as they walked back toward the truck, the morning light breaking through the trees in soft, steady lines, Daniel did not look back, because some doors are not meant to be watched once they close, only remembered for what they revealed. And somewhere within him, a quiet understanding took hold, that sometimes the signals we miss do not disappear, they wait, patiently, for the moment we are